Welcome to the premiere session of HBTV. HB stands for me, Harry Binswanger. I'm a philosopher. I adhere to Ayn Rand's objectivist philosophy. I've taught philosophy at several American universities. I have books that I've edited, books that I've written, and this production is brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center of the United Kingdom. And I want to turn it over for a minute to Nikos Sotirakopoulos, if I got that right, to say a few words about the administrative and production ends. Nikos.
Thank you, Harry. So welcome everyone to this new show, to this new endeavor. So the way this will work is every week Harry is going to deal with one or two topics that are taken either from the discussion in HBL, which is the Harry Binswanger letter, which is the community, the online community that Harry has created. But at the end, we're also going to leave some 10-15 minutes maybe for general questions. So how do you ask a question? If you're an ARC UK member, you get priority. So Razi has explained how you can ask the questions within the community through the WhatsApp groups of the community, but priority is going to be given also on super chats. So you can super chat the question, and then Raz is going to give me the question, and I'm going to pass the question to Harry. First priority, questions on the topic. Second priority, questions that could be anything you want to ask Harry that you think you can use his knowledge and his mind. So this is how it's gonna work. And also to say a big thank you to the Ayn Rand Institute, which is sponsoring and is supporting and is sanctioning this new series. So Harry, without further delay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I said I'm a philosopher, and our topic today is evolution, fact in biology, fiction in psychology. I'm going to be taking a philosopher's approach, but I do have a background in science. I did my undergraduate work at MIT. I wrote my doctoral thesis on the philosophy of biology. I'm currently writing a book on the philosophy of mathematics. So I'm at least an informed amateur on many scientific subjects, and two of them are involved here, biology and psychology. Now, let me observe at the outset that a lot of trouble in the history of philosophy, you could argue all the trouble, is caused by false alternatives that have been put forward. You know, the false alternative like death by hanging or death by drowning, which do you want? Are you still beating your wife? You can't say yes, you can't say no. A lot of issues in the philosophy, in philosophy revolve around things that have been misconceptualized, miscategorized, so that it seems that you have to choose between two forms of poison. For example, the left wing in politics, and politics is a branch of philosophy. The left wing in politics is said to be communism, and what's the right wing as extreme on the right is communism is on the left. Fascism. So you're offered two forms of dictatorship. You're either going to die for the Fuhrer or you're going to die for the proletariat vanguard into the future, but you're going to die. In ethics, speaking of Nazism, did you know that Hitler said one is either the hammer or the anvil? I confess that I'm preparing the German people for the role of the hammer. Well, the idea of sacrificing yourself to others or sacrificing them to you is an incredibly big false alternative in the history of philosophy. A non-sacrificial relationship to other people is not even on the table. It's been ruled out, just as freedom has been ruled out by the conception that you have to choose between two forms of dictatorship. Render unto Caesar or unto God? Well, how about not rendering? How about not giving of your substance to either the priest or the king, the Attila or the witch doctor, as Ayn Rand put it? In the theory of knowledge, which is my specialty, epistemology, the two dominant theories are mysticism and skepticism. Do you believe that knowledge comes in revelations that just implant themselves as dogmas into your head, or through authorities who got mystic revelation? Or do you say, no, there are no revelations, so nobody can be certain of anything? Mysticism or skepticism is a false alternative. You can know by using a proper method. What is that method? Well, we have a false alternative for those few who believe there's something between dogmatism and throwing up your hands in ignorance, that there's a method. Some say it's logic, and some say, no, it's observation. Why can't it be logic acting on observation? It's both. It's observation and logic. We don't choose between what's called rationalism, which is logic without sense perception, or empiricism, which is sense perception without logic. Fate, is there fate? Or is it random what people do? That is a false alternative. Is it God or blind chance that life exists on Earth? That's the false alternative that we're going to take up first. But the bigger thing I decided that integrates this topic is the nature of man. There are those who say man is different. Man is not an animal. Man is a special kind of thing, so evolution is false. And there's the people who say, no, evolution is true, so man is an animal. Man is meat. Man has the same kind of nature as the monkey, the tiger, the amoeba, eventually. So both of those are wrong. It's like choosing between two forms of poison. Man is different. Man evolved in a way that makes him different. He's not meat. He's a mind in a body, and those two are not at war. Mind and body are another false alternative. The mind is the controlling element that runs the body, both of them being biological. Okay, so let's take up now evolution. Let's take up evolution. And here I'm confronting the mystics, the religionists, the people who say it's God's law, it's written, it's creation, versus those who unfortunately are on the other side and say it's just blind chance and skepticism and who's to know, and all we can say is we're here. No, evolution is fact. It is a theory in the sense in which the Pythagorean theorem is a theory. It's an abstract statement of fact. It's a general observation of how the world works that's proven. It's not a hypothesis. The opponents of evolution in biology will say, well, it's just a theory. No, it's a theory, all right, and it's a proven theory. The evolution is the gradual change in populations over millions of years, resulting in the tree of life, the proliferation of life forms from the single-celled organism out to all the different plants and animals, including man. The tree of life is called the taxonomy. It's how you classify living organisms. And taxonomy shows descent. We all descended from the same original living organism, single-celled organism. This is fact, not theory. It's not a hypothesis. It's necessary if you think about it for 2 seconds. And if you accept that the Earth is old, and was not created in 6006 BC, but is, as all of science shows us, is very, very old, just like Mars is old and the sun is old and the whole galaxy is old, compared to Nico. It's just not old compared to me, but it's relatively old. It's been around for billions of years, the Earth. And if you consider that all during the time that life has existed on Earth, which is about 1 billion years, it reproduces, right? It reproduces, it copies itself. And the copying is not 100% perfect. Even in asexual organisms, mutations happen in organisms that simply divide, like a single cell organism. Errors come in. So it is not possible that the Earth, if it's billions of years old, has reproduced organisms. And sometimes every few minutes, like bacteria, and there were never any copies that changed anything. Now, there's an interesting wrinkle here. If you took a photocopy of a page and ran it through another photocopier and took the product of that and ran through another photocopier, eventually you'd have a gray mess. But that's not what happens in sexual reproduction, or even asexual reproduction. Why? Because it's quantized. The DNA code can only exist, every nucleotide connection can only be one of 4. So there are 4 letters to the genetic code, and it can't be in between. Guanine, adenosine, cytosine, uracil, and thymine. There's a reason why it's more than 4 in that count. It's not important. There's not half guanine. That won't work. That won't bind to the double helix. It won't produce anything. So on the molecular level, organisms are quantized. Their genetics can be one letter or another letter, but not in between. It's not continuous. So that means when errors occur, what you get is a different chemical structure, not just a blur. Now, most of these different chemical structures will be bad. And most of the recombinations and mutations that occur kill the nascent organism. But if you got 1 billion years, you got plenty of time for some good ones to come out. And by good ones, I mean changes that improve the organism's chances of survival. That's what Darwin figured out. Not in terms of the molecular structure. He had no clue of how heredity worked. But now, the modern Darwin synthesis, we know about DNA and RNA and the coding and everything. And some changes which are heritable are such as to improve the chances of survival, and some most are not. But the ones that improve the chances of survival also improve the chances of reproduction. In fact, some biologists like to talk about reproductive survival. I don't like that, but it's arguable. So that which is better equipped to survive tends to survive more and reproduce more. So it's cumulative. Then the next mutation or sexual recombination is a bigger factor than mutation. The cross between the male and the female produces something a little different combination of elements that were there before. So the better adapted organism now produces still better adapted organisms. Adaptation is relative to the environment, so to be still better doesn't necessarily mean it's competing with the existing population. It may be still better because it can digest something that the existing population can't, so it can eat food that doesn't compete with the existing population. Or it shows a preference for a certain kind of environment, maybe a little cooler environment. It's better adapted for that. And it leaves the existing population. So it isn't always competition. It isn't always like we get the super best paramecium there ever could be, and that's the end of the story. There are new structures that arise gradually through natural selection on random mutations. So chance, the role of chance in or randomness in evolution according to natural selection is as input. You have random chance changes made could be by cosmic rays knocking out an electron from an orbit and changing the valence of some component of the DNA. Or it could be the chromosome mix between male and female, but there's going to be random change. Most of it will be bad, but 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100 will be a little better. And if you've got 1 billion years, you end up with me and you. Now, I'm just about finished with the exposition of why evolution is fact. But it's always said, if you put 1 million monkeys at 1 million typewriters, they will never produce the works of Shakespeare. Richard Dawkins has a great answer to that, which is he takes a line of Shakespeare and he picks, "Methinks it is like a weasel," which I think is from Hamlet, which is 28 letters counting the spaces, 28 characters. And if you say, well, what is the chance that monkeys will type that out at random, banging at all the keys, make it only uppercase to make it simple? Uppercase keyboard with a space bar. What are the chances that that exact sequence, which is just one phrase from Shakespeare? Well, I asked my friend, who cannot be named because her name is spelled Alexa, and she's listening. I asked her to do the calculation. What is 27 to the 28th power? And she said 11,970 trillion. So it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen that way. But now if you write a little computer program, as I have, to make random changes in each of the letters. So you start with a nonsense. Let's say you start, just for the sake of argument, with 28 A's, A, 28 times, but it could be any combination. And you, in each simulated generation, you change one letter at random, which letter is to be equivalent to a mutation. If it's closer to the target, like if you happen to mutate the first letter, which is A in my example, and it comes out J randomly, right? Well, J is a lot closer to I, which is the first letter, M. J is a lot closer to M for methinks than A is. So you keep that because that's an improvement in the organism's ability to survive. That's the analogy. If you do that and that you keep everything that's closer and you randomly try different letters randomly now, I've run the program. It's about 300 generations to get this thing that's 1 out of 11,970 trillion chances of coming in all at once, all four. But if you just take one site on the DNA, in effect, or one gene, and you change it randomly, sometimes it'll produce a better adapted organism, and that will be kept. And gradually you'll reach the perfection of methinks it's like a weasel. So the argument there is a complete ignorance of natural selection. Natural selection is a cumulative collection of things that are a little bit better. And that produces better and better and better and better over billions of years or hundreds of millions for most of this stuff.
Harry, can we have a short pause here for a couple of questions?
Well, no, because I have just one more thing, and then we'll stop because it's logical.
Okay.
The eye, the human eye. What good would half an eye be? What good would the eye has to be all that you've all heard this. It was originated by Richard Paley in the 1700s as an argument against evolution. The eye's no good unless it's all there, without the front or the back or whatever, it's no good. Well, that's just false. That's just false. There are plenty of creatures who have rudimentary eyes, even just light sensitive pigments on their skin. Then there's some that have a little cup, little indentation in their skin or surface where the light sensitive pigments are. And that gives a little directionality, a little focusing. And then some have a little layer, protective layer of translucent material that forms over it. And that can be gradually shaped into a lens, which brings in more light into that directional you find. So all the individual steps toward the eye, which are well understood, have adaptive value. They're better than what came before. Okay, want to take a question?
Yes, so just to understand what you said about survival and evolutionary advantage, let's take a giraffe, for example. So its advantage is that it has a very tall neck and it can bite from higher trees.
Right.
Was it the case that at some point one giraffe had a taller neck, and then because it survived, its kids had a taller neck, and then only what used to be whatever was the predecessor of giraffe, because each one had a taller and a taller and a taller neck, that's how we ended up with giraffes with tall neck?
Yes, each one that got a taller neck, if it got the supporting equipment, because you need special equipment inside, got more leaves than its competitors. So let's say its neck was one branch higher, it could get the leaves up there that its competitors couldn't, so it left more offspring. So that would be, now there's a limit on that. You can't, of course, there's a limit on trees too. They're not going to grow above where the trees are, where the leaves are. But, those science fiction movies about giant ants, the giant spiders, they are impossible because surface area goes up by the square, but volume and weight goes up by the cube. So you cannot build a huge thing on an ant's exoskeleton. It will collapse. The juices inside will not circulate. So it's not true that everything's scalable, but you can adapt the equipment to within limits to do certain things.
Thank you. Makes sense. We haven't got a question up to this point. Robert sends a first super chat. So thank you, Robert. He welcomes you in ARC UK. So let's proceed, I assume, to psychology now.
No, we got a great cashing in on this, which is when it goes back to the false alternatives. I've given you the Darwinian and neo-Darwinian viewpoint, and I'd like to read from another text which offers another approach. And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after its kind, cattle and creeping thing, and the beast of the earth after its kind. And it was so. Now, that is not a theory. That is a story, and it has no factual basis whatsoever and is not in competition with Darwin's theory. So you could question Darwin's theory, you can question Pythagorean theorem, you can question Newton's laws, you can question Einstein, you can question all kinds of things. But at no point do you have the logical right to bring in, well, maybe there's a super ghost who just wishes things into existence and bam, they pop in. And maybe that explains things. That is out. So that was, I'm ready to go on now.
Let's proceed. Thanks.
Okay. The topic, the basis for this, why we're concerned with it, is to apply it to ourselves. And I said that there's a false alternative of man is special, so evolution is false, or else man is just meat, right? Biologists, rational biologists, write that man is the Lord of creation. The great biologist Theodosius Dobzhansky, probably the premier evolutionary biologist of the 20th century, who I had the pleasure to meet at Rockefeller University, wrote that the adaptive value of foresight is obvious. It has raised man to the status of the Lord of creation. And if you think about it, the biomass, as they like to call it, of the human species has grown a millionfold since we were on the plains of Africa, or our ancestors were. Why? Why do we have cities? Why am I talking to you on YouTube and other video, whereas my cats just lie around the house? Because I have the faculty of reason. So if you're going to be biologically serious, you have to grasp the biological fact that man's ecological niche is to make his own ecological niche by the use of his rational thinking mind. That is man's distinctive ability. That is why he's not meat. He evolved a cerebral cortex and a forebrain capable of using conceptual abstract knowledge to develop a scale of cognition that no animal comes remotely near to possessing. So reason is man's basic means of survival, is one of the principles Ayn Rand enunciated countless times. And it's pretty damn obvious that that's true. You know, if you were put a baby or even a 5-year-old out on the African plains, left him out of contact with all human beings, he wouldn't start doing what a equivalent tiger cub or monkey would do at a young age. He wouldn't know what to do. He doesn't have instincts. That what he needs to survive has to be learned. And the faculty of learning is reason, which is, getting back to the other point, logic applied to observational input. So, you know, to survive, man needs clothing, food, shelter, tools, and a code to guide his interactions with other men. None of those are born into us. So they are learned, and the faculty of learning, they're learned as conceptual ideas, general abstract ideas like hammer or machine or right angle triangle or cyclotron or DNA. Those are the things that advance our survival, or transistor and byte, B-Y-T-E. Animals only have B-I-T-E. They don't have B-Y-T-E. That's what I'm saying. So if you're going to be seriously biological about man, you would not describe him as the naked ape, as one author did. You would describe him as Aristotle is, the rational animal. He's the animal whose evolutionary tool, his adaptive advantage, comes through the use of his mind. He can't run faster than the cheetah. He can't win a contest of strength with a bear. He can't dig in the ground as well as an armadillo. The only advantage he has is his mind. And that comes from his brain, but it is not, and here's where we get to evolutionary psychology. The content of his mind is not created by his DNA or his brain. It's created by what he chooses to do with his mind, how he thinks. Whether he thinks and how he thinks is up to him. And that's what evolutionary psychology is devoted to denying. Should I take a breath there, Nikos? Because I have a lot more.
Let's continue maybe the section on evolutionary psychology, so then we can go to the relevant questions on evolutionary psychology.
Another principle of objectivism enters here because psychology deals with motivation and why we want what we want and how we go about getting it. And the other principle of objectivism is emotions come from thoughts. Emotions come from evaluations. Now, they come from evaluations that have been made habitual, in Ayn Rand's terms, that have become automatized. So they occur super fast and below the level of awareness. So when you turn around and you see the basketball heading for your head through the air, you don't have to go through syllogism and think, oh, well, that's a moderately heavy object with a lot of momentum. When it hits my head, it's going to do damage and I'll feel pain. Let me get out of the way. No, you long ago in infancy learned that things that you bump against or bump against you hurt. So you have automatized value judgments, automatized evaluations of the beneficial or harmful relationship with things to yourself. And some of these, none of these are built in, but there is something that's the base of them that's built in. What is built in, what is not? Love is not built in, hate is not built in, fear is not built in, but physical bodily pleasure and pain, tastes and scents, and to some extent sounds are built in. So if somebody jabs your hand with a knife, the fact that it hurts is in the structure of the nerve endings in your hand. If he burns it with a flame, the reason is your wiring, not any learning that you did. In the womb, if you could, the doctor could reach in there and do something bad to you, it would hurt. You probably do have some pains and pleasures in the womb. The soft caress of the skin is generally pleasurable. Eating when you're hungry is pleasurable. Drinking when you're thirsty is pleasurable. So the bodily sensations are a very different thing from emotions. And the evolutionary psychologists hold, to quote the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, psychological phenomena, this is the evolutionary approach, which is wrong, are adaptations, products of natural selection that helped our ancestors get around the world, survive, and reproduce. Now, that's talking about the fact that you like philosophy, the fact that you want to understand, the fact that you like basketball or baseball, the fact that you have the friends you do, the fact that you are honest or dishonest. It's talking about motivation. And it's saying that that is produced by what happened to your ancestors. No, it did not get produced that way. It got produced by what you thought, concluded, and habitually reinforced in your mind till it became a mental habitual way of thinking. Your automatized value judgments. And I have one good example of it, partly made up, but I'm willing to have it tested. I saw a video when I took comparative physiological psychology at MIT, and they had not a video, we called it a film clip then, of a cage with young monkey chimps in it, who had been raised in the lab since birth and had never seen certain things. In particular, they'd never seen snakes. The experimenter takes some garden hose, cuts it up to about snake length, and puts it into the cage, on the floor of the cage where these naive monkeys, and they start screaming and climbing the walls of the cage to get out of there. So they have a built-in visual programming to respond emotionally with fear to something that looks like a snake. There are many other similar experiments like chicks. They flew a cutout shape of a hawk over a pen where chicks had been raised, never having seen a hawk, and they went crazy with fear. It's called innate fear of the hawk shape. But they didn't have that fear if the shape was that of what's called a gallinaceous bird, like a goose, a friendly bird to it, because they were goslings, I think. So there are, for animals, built-in emotional reactions to percepts, not to ideas, but because they don't have any, but to percepts. But here's the part that I haven't seen tried out, but I'm willing to bet. You take a human infant and you put a snake in its crib, I predict it will not feel fear because it has not learned even that there is such a thing as being hurt by a moving object yet, let alone that there's something special about a weirdly moving object like that. So, and certainly the shape of a hawk, obviously that's species specific. They wouldn't be afraid of the hawk. But I'm sure tiger would not scare them. Here's the killer example that we can all, and killer is a well-chosen word, we can all relate to. Somebody bursts into the baby's room holding a machine gun and pointing at the baby. Now, aside from the noise he makes bursting in, the fact that he's got a machine gun, baby has no reaction to that because it doesn't know what a machine gun is. It doesn't know what being shot is. It does, if it doesn't. So you have to learn, the human organism has to learn the value significance of things above direct physical contact, but not all animals are like that. Human beings have a degree of freedom, and this is my objection to evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology is deterministic. It says you don't control your mind and therefore your motivation. Your genes control it. Your inherited tendencies control it. You are programmed by ancestors you know nothing about. So it is a primitive form of the evil that if you generalize it, is racism. It's the idea that in your blood, in your genes, in your bodily makeup, there's something that determines your motivation. Now, I was told, and I think correctly, to be careful here that there are two different things. There's what you might call the biological - evolutionary explanation of why we have the equipment we do. We have a cerebral cortex and an enlarged frontal lobe because it enables us to think. That's an entirely different issue than what you think. So it's like you buy a hard drive and it's empty. It doesn't have preloaded on it essays by somebody or manuals or whatever. I mean, it could because it's a computer, but your brain does not come with content, beliefs built into it. What it comes wired up to do is to feel pain when certain things interact with your body, or pleasure and when other things interact with your body. But the conclusions you draw about the objects in the world as to whether they'll cause pleasure or pain has to do with your learning, with your thinking. It's not built in. Why did this happen? Because consider the alternative. Well, it happened to give flexibility. It happened in order to free the human Homo sapiens to be able to do things that animals would be too scared to do. The obvious one is fire. Imagine that you were built, like I suppose certain animals are, to fear fire. Well, you could never have Prometheus. You could never have tamed fire. Imagine that you were built, as certain animals are, to either like or dislike strangers, other people of your species, They're social animals and they're lone wolf animals, so to speak. Man is not born either way. If he was, he'd be in big trouble, because you have to use your mind to judge the beneficial or harmful nature of the people you're dealing with. You can't, if you try to go by, you don't have any, instincts, but even just the appearance, you will mess yourself up. You can't judge people's character by their appearance. So the reason why evolutionary meta-psychology is correct, that is, how did the equipment get set up to be able to allow us to be free to think, that's valid. It's really part of biology. But the idea that specific motivation is implanted in you at birth, so you have a tendency to become a criminal because your grandparents are criminals or something, that is bizarrely false. So I can pause here. I have a summing up, but we could pause here, Nikos.
Okay, so let's pause. First of all, a quick thank you to Sally, Jeff, Jonathan, Marilyn, and Christopher for your support. A very beautiful message from Bonnie. She says, so hard to think of questions when I just want to listen. Will happily pay super chat to listen as much as possible. And Jeff, agree. So, but let's go to a couple of questions now in defense of evolutionary psychology. So someone would say that what you mentioned about the snake thrown in the monkey cage, this is a checkmate for evolutionary psychology. And they will bring this example. They will say, how can you explain that someone in Alaska or in Northern Siberia who hasn't come 10,000 miles close to a dangerous spider, they might see a tarantula in a book and get a panic attack, or they might see it in a film and freak out. They've never seen one, they've never been close to one. So how would you explain that arachnophobia is equally prevalent in Africa or in the jungle, but at the same time on North Pole? What is it if
because
not?
There's certain features of spiders. There's certain features. I have arachnophobia, and there's certain features of spiders that are unsettling. They're erratic motion, the fact that they are different from all, the animals we're familiar with have 4 legs or even 2 rows of legs, and they move in a certain way. The spider is very erratic, and and snakes are poisonous. If you know that, you might think that spiders are poisonous. So I reject the premise that everybody fears spiders, though. There are plenty of people who like spiders, and plenty of people who have no reaction to them whatsoever. I happen to be the one who finds them frightening, and I have since childhood, when I had a dream about spiders, but I don't know what caused it, but it's not built in at birth. There are a lot of things. Give me your other examples, Nikos, because I know you have others.
Okay, so the one was the spider there. And sorry, just to finish what I was saying. So they say that because you had the fear of spider, you survived, as opposed to your ancestor who said, oh, how beautiful spider, and he was beaten and dead. So basically your fear gave you an advantage, and an evolutionary advantage, so to speak.
Well, that would be really rare. As a person who got bitten by a spider and died, that is not a common occurrence. And why would that? Let's give the example of cave animals to refute that. Cave animals are animals who have, adopted a cave environment where there's no light, and these are things like moles and equivalent of rodents that live above ground. So they're evolutionarily fairly recent. I don't know how recent, but they don't have eyes. They don't have pigments in their skin. They don't have all the things that you have when you live in a lighted environment. Why? Because it costs energy to grow them, and it costs information costs to store it in your DNA. So nothing keeps it in line in the DNA. If you lose the ability to have melanin, nothing eliminates you from that population. So a thing that is not selected for will disappear. Now, look at the skin color, for instance, of people in the northern climes who haven't been there that long. Norwegians, Irish, Finnish, Siberians, they have physically different traits than people who live in Africa, where there's a lot of sun. And that's, you're talking about really recent evolution. So, because when did that occur? So, why wouldn't they lose the ability to the inherited view that spiders are dangerous when they're not that dangerous? I mean, there is the black widow spider, but I think it's not really lethal unless you're an infant. I guess
But
if you're
here's,
an infant,
that's the weird thing though. No arachnophobic is gonna freak out with a black widow, which is dangerous. They're gonna freak out with the big spiders, which
yes.
actually are not dangerous to humans.
Yeah, well, tarantula is a little dangerous, but yeah, I freak out at the big ones and not the little ones because of what they mean to me, what they represent, it's a big erratic. For instance, if they were real slow moving, imagine you got spiders, but they lumber. I wouldn't be afraid of them, but I feel like they could run and jump in my face, and that would be really horrible. So I think it's your understanding of the nature of the thing, there's something irrational. It's not really irrational, but it suggests random, unpredictable action on the part of the entity.
So the two other examples would be disgust. So for example, why do we want to throw up when we see a dead animal that smells bad? And again, they say evolutionary advantage. And the last one, which is perhaps the spicier one and the most interesting one, they would say that it's the same type of man, V-shape, looking dominant, that is appealing from Saudi Arabia to Thailand to Greece to Mexico to North Pole. Why, if not through this evolutionary mechanism that he's the provider, he's the alpha male of the tribe?
Well, to take up the last one first, it is that, but that's not determined by innate wiring in your retina or your lateral geniculate body. It's, you learn what a capable athletic form looks like. So a fat, rounded, well, of course, sumo wrestlers, but they cannot move fast, apparently. And maybe in cultures where there are a lot of sumo wrestlers, they're probably considered attractive. I don't know. But the figures that are considered attractive are the figures that look capable and healthy. And that is a value. It is a value, but it's learned. You're not born at birth with a stick figure imprinted in your brain. You know, Freud shocked me. And I never liked Freud, but he shocked me. He held that the image of the mother's breast is born into the infant. Before birth, he has somehow the image of his mother's breast in his mind. That is bizarre. And don't attempt to explain things. I'm not saying you, but people shouldn't attempt to explain things by a circuitous way, which is explained in an obvious way. That's Occam's razor. And the obvious thing is people look like the statues of the Greek gods. One of the things Marianne Suris said in her lectures, they look capable of movement. They look efficacious. They look athletic. They look like a man in control of himself. That is attractive. And that not because of biology, but because of biology ultimately, but not because of inheritance, but because you learn that it's life-serving and you face the alternative of life versus death. Now, the other one is disgust. Well, disgust it has a bodily component. You know, smell, for instance, but there are disgusting sights also. But they have to do with values being torn asunder. Like if you saw a human corpse hacked up or something, you would be disgusted because you value the human corpse, the human body, the live human body. But, you know, a smell that's disgusting and makes you want to throw up, that's wired in. That is wired in. And that's why we don't eat that as food. It's just for the reason you said. So bodily sensations are evolved. And if they weren't, you could never get started. Let me tell you the story of a friend of mine's daughter. When she was 3 months old, she began to smile when she saw the milk bottle approaching. Up to that point, she obviously liked being fed, but she had not connected that sight with the coming of that pleasurable experience. So if you didn't have any physical bodily pleasure or pain or unsettled or affect, if you didn't have any bodily positive and negative sensations, you have no basis to have any kind of emotions at all. So it's a good thing that nature gives us that start. But it's also a good thing that she frees us to draw our own conclusions of what will bring long-term pleasure, not just physical pleasure, but mental pleasure and pain. That's what enables us to prosper.
Good. Let's go also to some questions from our audience. Again, huge thank you to everyone who is contributing super chats. So Nathan asks, would you say that chicks have an innate belief that hawks are bad? Do animals have some beliefs?
No,
That's
it's called
related
an
to the
innate.
example you brought up.
No, they have no beliefs. It's described in the course I took in 1962, 63 as an IRM, an innate releasing mechanism. So the hormones flow, I suppose, when it sees that. Now, we have the same thing, but not with vision. So things that taste good, and things that taste bad, and pains and sounds, even if I play two close notes on the piano, like C and C sharp, it'll be repellent to everybody, just those two notes alone. And if a sound is too loud, it causes pain. If a sound is sudden, it's startling, and babies have that startle response. But not any vision. As far as I know, there's, unlike with the animals, I should say one other thing, there are no visual stimuli that before learning are experiences positive or negative. Now I was going to tell you, well, there's two things. The question was asked by a philosopher whose name I forget, which maybe will come to me. What if a person was born blind and his sight was restored as an adult for the first time? And suppose he had learned through the sense of touch to distinguish, say, a round object from a pointy object and a pencil from an egg, by feel, the shapes. And you restore his sight, and you place on a table in front of him these objects and ask which one is the round object, which one is the pencil, which one is the... Could he do it? And this, Molyneux is the philosopher, French philosopher. This was sort of an open question, and philosophers argued, no, he couldn't do it because you have to learn that connection. But the experiment was actually done by one of my old professors, Richard Held, and you can watch the video on YouTube. They got surgery to remove lifelong cataracts so that people could perceive, and they could not tell, which makes a tremendous amount of sense, because when we close our eyes and feel things, we're picturing them. But if you never had any pictures, you would just have the motor sensations, and you would not know how to correlate that with a new sense coming in. So that's an interesting thing that goes to the learning of even the rudimentary connections that we think of as innate but aren't.
Thank you. One more super chat by Adam. Thank you so much, Adam. Very generous super chat. So how about fear of the unidentified? fear of humans who do not identify. I assume this means humans we do not know, or fears of the alien, so to speak.
Yeah, well, you learn that because you don't know that there is such a thing as identification when you're born. You learn that it's better to know than not to know. And you learn that people who know can treat you better than people who don't know. Particularly in the moral realm, people don't know moral principles, are likely to mistreat you. And that's kind of the story of every soap opera. So, yeah, that's learned. You're not born knowing that you have a consciousness or that anybody else does. And now I did want to do the cashing in, the summary, Nikos, in the 2 minutes that are left.
Just also let me say one more time, thank you to all super chatters. Jeff add some more super chats. Thank you, Jeff. So Harry, do the outro, and then I'll finish off with what is following for the rest of the week, and then we're done.
Okay. The outro is a summary, which is the whole theme of this, is that it's a false alternative to talk about man being a creature of God or a creature of his glands and genes. Man has free will. It's a biological fact that man controls his own mind. Your free will is your ability to control your mind, how you think and the extent to which you think. Man's body does not control his mind or its content. And man is very different from the other animals in that way. But even if you look at the animal world, the degree of stereotyped behavior that's built in gets less and less as you go up the phylogenetic scale. So a monkey is much more flexible in its behavior than an ant. And if you break a spider's web, it will not repair it. It will just start to spin a new web from the beginning. And no matter how many times you break it, that's what it will do. So the lesson of consciousness is it allows for freedom. And man's consciousness, being the most powerful and widest ranging, has the most freedom, namely the freedom to control its own processes.
Thank you very much, Harry.
Thank you.
So, have you got time for one more question from the audience? Sorry?
I said it's fine with me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. So the last question is, how is mental pleasure related to physical sensation? Ask Azad.
That's a great question. Mental pleasure concerns efficacy. What you take pleasure in is succeeding in some activity, even like in sports, if it's an arbitrary activity that doesn't get you anything, or a game where it's set up that there's no real world payoff, you enjoy feeling that you can do it. Why? Because you need to be able to do things in order to live and be happy. So it's a meta level pleasure, a pleasure in your ability to get enjoyment.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Harry. Many thanks also to the super chatters and everyone who watched this. And of course, a huge thank you to the Ayn Rand Institute, which is sanctioning this new series morally, but not only moral, but also materially. Now, for the rest of this week, what is coming from ARC UK? A lot of stuff, but particularly two things. Tomorrow, the debate between Yaron Brook and musician and social commentator Zubi on the topic tradition, good or bad. So that's tomorrow, 7 o'clock. And Thursday, we are launching, and that's open to everyone via YouTube. Thursday, we're launching the communication bootcamp with Don Watkins. So this is a program through which we become better communicators. We become better at expressing our views, delimiting how we express our views. So if you know Don Watkins, you know this is definitely going to worth it. This is only for members though. So arc.uk/membership, support what we're doing. Hopefully you're getting value from these programs, from Harry's knowledge. Also, if you you have to, at some point, if you're interested in understanding objectivist epistemology, you can also read not only the classic, the Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology by Ayn Rand, but also How We Know by Epistemology on an Objectivist Foundation by Harry. So that is all for today. Thank you very much. Thanks, Bonnie, for one more super chat. And we're going to be back for more next week. We don't know the topic yet. We're going to see what it will be. And also a reminder, you can send questions in advance of general philosophic or practical interest. And hopefully we're going to have time at the end and Harry will address them. Thank you, everyone.
They can suggest a topic. They can ask for a topic to be covered.
You can also ask for a topic to be covered, and we're going to pass it to Harry, and we'll see what happens. Okay. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, everyone.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye.